Okay, can everybody see my screen okay? Awesome. All right, so today we're talking about scenario-based learning, which is one of my favorite topics and has been throughout my PhD program. I'm Heidi. As Will mentioned, I have a podcast, a learning and development podcast called The Block, or Building Learning and Organizational Culture podcast. I'm a PhD candidate in instructional design and technology at Old Dominion University, and hopefully, fingers crossed, this year I will be defending my dissertation at some point in the near future. And I currently work as a customer education manager for a tech company. And I am also a current and former college professor. So I actually got my start in learning, teaching college English quite a long time ago now at this point, and then transitioned into corporate instructional design. But just this past January, I started teaching a podcasting course for the University of Florida's communications grad program. So teaching yet again back in the classroom, and it's super fun. So I really loved it. So I want to start out with like our textbook definition of scenario-based learning, right? And who better than Ruth Colvin Clark, if you know of her. She literally wrote the book on scenario-based learning. And so her definition is that scenario-based learning is an instructional environment in which participants solve carefully constructed, authentic job tasks or problems. And so if we want to think about it in its simplest terms, right? Think about like a math story problem that you had when you were younger, right? Like the very typical one is there's a train coming from the east at 72 miles per hour. There's a train coming from the west at 60 miles per hour. If this one leaves from here, if this one leaves from here, at what point do they meet, right? That's technically scenario-based learning, right? Because you're giving a story, you're giving a situation, you're giving a problem, and then you're, asking for someone to solve that. So that is, sorry, I'm just trying to move the chat so I can see it. There we go. So that's really the definition. And the key components are a story, a scenario, not to use the word in the definition, but like a story or a situation that you present to the learners, and then giving them the ability to solve that by either choosing a series of choices, picking the right answer, coming up with their own answer, things like that. And so one of the easiest ways to kind of separate out what scenario-based learning is to talk about what it isn't, right? And so it's not project-based learning, because project-based learning requires some sort of end product, right? Like you're either creating an artifact or a plan or a project, right, at the end of the learning experience. That's not necessarily the case with scenario-based learning. It's more about how you're approaching the problem and solving the problem. It's also not simulation-based learning. That's often a common misconception because the two are used together so often. But simulation-based learning is really immersing someone in the situation. So think like virtual reality or augmented reality. Now, that's not to say that scenario-based learning can't be used in conjunction with either of these, because it certainly can and has been, but it is separate, right? And so, again, the key components are you're presented with a problem through either a story or a scenario. It can be a really big scenario, like a lot of context, right? Especially with like soft skills training, we see that where they kind of set the whole stage and give you a long story of here's what has happened in the past, here's where we're at now, here's what the problem is. Or it can be pretty short, like the math story problem that I mentioned. It gives a lot of different options. And one of the things about the options is that what you don't want to do is have all those options be very obvious, right? If there's a very obvious right answer throughout the whole thing, that kind of takes away from the scenario or the story a little bit. And it allows the learners to kind of explore and solve the problem. The question, would a case study be considered scenario-based learning? I guess that depends on what the learner is supposed to do with the case study, right? So if there's like a series of questions where you present the case study and then you like ask the learner what they would do in that situation, then yeah, totally, that could be considered scenario-based learning. If you're just presenting it for informational purposes, not so much. It's more of, just presenting information. So I definitely don't want to do all the talking today. I would love for you all to spend some time in breakout rooms chatting with each other. And so what I've done is I've created a couple of scenarios, and I want you just to look at these from the perspective of thinking about them as a learner, right? And what are the differences? What are you being asked to do in each one? And what are the options? And I really just want you to point out the differences. There's going to be 2 scenarios. I'll show you here. We'll spend 15 minutes in a breakout room and just kind of explore, is one better than the other? How are they different? You don't need to actually answer either of the questions, right? We're just discussing the scenario. So before we go into the breakout rooms, I'll just go ahead and read these out for you. So the first one is, Bernie is about to start his first day of his new job. He's extremely excited to start orientation and learn all about his new company, but he's also a little nervous. He has a personal email on his phone from the company's HR with his login information for his new Windows computer. He takes the charged computer off his desk. He turns it on. What should he do next to log in? Type in his username and password, click on the sign in options button, or call HR for additional help. That's scenario 1. Scenario 2, Shayna has been in her role as an instructional designer for 3.5 years. She has excelled on all her performance reviews, and last December she was promoted to the role of senior instructional designer, but she did not receive a raise. She wasn't confident enough to ask for it at the time, but she feels ready to ask her manager for a raise now. What should she do first to start the conversation? Write her boss an email asking for the raise, email her boss to set up some time to talk, or send her boss a message on Slack saying, we need to talk. So how did it go? If you want to share any takeaways in the chat, that would be great. I'm guessing that, oops, moving stuff around. Okay, I'm guessing that people kind of had the same good discussion. Great. It was great. Good. Hold on one second. My screen is not being nice with this view of people right now. Here, let me move it. Okay, there it is. Woo, there you all are. Couldn't see you for a moment. My group was amazing. You could easily see that scenario-based learning doesn't fit everywhere. That's so true. Whether the Bernie scenario required an actual training or just a job aid how-to, scenario 1 isn't optimal for scenario-based learning. Yes, that's what I was going for essentially. So let me jump ahead to the next slide here. So one of the components of scenario-based learning, hard skills versus soft skills. Okay, great. So looking at the differences, it doesn't fit everywhere, right? And so one of the key components to scenario-based learning is that it's good to have what we call an ill-structured problem when you're creating scenario-based learning. So scenario 1 was what we call a well-structured problem, right? It's something that has a clear solution. It has one possible answer, and you can basically think of like, can you Google this to find out the answer, right? Or is this something that is a step that can be memorized? Like somebody said, a job aid or something that's like a very step-by-step thing, where if Bernie had called HR, that would be a little much, right? especially since he could just follow the directions in front of him and turn on the computer, right? And so there's not a lot of like thought that you have to put into, what's the right decision here, right? Because he's got the paper in front of him that tells him how to log in, right? Whereas an ill-structured problem is one that doesn't really have a clear solution. It has multiple possible answers and it's more complex. What's the right answer in scenario 2? Well, that depends. It depends on so many things. It depends on how your organization communicates. If it's completely acceptable to send somebody a message on Slack to set up a meeting with them, or if it's completely acceptable to ask for a raise via email. I know that I've never experienced a workplace where that was kind of encouraged or accepted, but it really depends on your organization, and it really depends on how you want to communicate. And the answers aren't as clear cut, which is how we kind of encounter problems in our workplaces, right? Like, we aren't always faced with nice, clean, well-structured problems, especially in instructional design, right? It's usually, hey, I need a training. And then now we have to problem solve and figure out, why do you need a training? Who is it for? What is it going to, what content is it going to cover? And so it's a lot easier to create something that's engaging and has like the level of nuance and being able to really think, okay, what is the best answer here, instead of having a clear right answer. Which leads us to the benefits of scenario-based learning, because having those ill-structured problems can help learners build confidence. I want to answer this question real quick. Is it safe to say that scenario-based learning can be a good fit in problems that have multiple solutions? Yes, if there's a consensus on what the best practice or best solution is, or if you build it out, you could potentially have more than one right answer, right? And so you could explain to the learner like that there are more than one right way to do this, right? Does it belong more in soft skill training? It works better for soft skill training for sure, but you can create a scenario to help someone solve technical problems as well. You just have to kind of think about what might be a complicated problem that somebody would encounter as far as, in a technical setting. There's more than one way to draw a toilet. Okay, so let me go to the benefits real quick because I got distracted by the toilet comment. But one of the things that it does is it can help the learners build confidence, right? So if you are experiencing work-related issues in a safe setting of scenario-based learning, and you're able to answer the wrong answers, see what the outcome is, answer the right answer, see what the outcome is. Answer, like, I always like to put in like a medium, like, this may not have been the best outcome, but it's still acceptable, right? I like to create my scenarios that way so that there's kind of like a middle ground, right? Because that exists in real life. Sometimes the outcome isn't the best case scenario, and sometimes it's not the worst case, but it helps people to build that confidence in a safe space where they have the ability to fail without it impacting their actual job or career or anything like that. It increases engagement, especially if we're talking branching scenarios, which is a whole separate kind of rabbit hole to jump down. But basically, a branching scenario is multiple scenarios where the answers to each one link to another kind of scenario or situation. And it really helps engage the learners because it gives them a sense of autonomy over what's happening, and it gives them a sense of control over the outcome. It's also proven to have to increase retention, right? Because of the storytelling aspect of having a scenario and what storytelling does for our retention, and because it's encouraging that problem solving and that higher level thinking that lends itself to better retention. It may also help people to realize where they have an information deficit, or maybe they didn't realize that something was best practice and they were doing it incorrectly, or that they wouldn't have handled the situation a certain way. And research also proves it's more effective than other methods of learning, like reflection-based learning or lecture-based learning. And the last thing, which is probably my favorite, is that it's so versatile, right? You can do it, you can include scenario-based learning in games. You can have fully text-based. Now, there are apps for like your phone that'll have like text-based, choose your own adventure, that are a lot more for entertainment, but you could have something similar that's fully text-based that walks you through a scenario, right? You don't even need to have photos or videos, but you can if you want. You can do augmented reality. You can combine it with virtual reality and simulation-based learning too. So I'm now looking at the comments in the chat here. I love what Mo says about it being about helping you to advocate better decision making. I think that's absolutely a great point. Learning and retention of information. Yes, that is true. And the tools, there's, Twine H5P, 7 tabs, and branch track is another one. Branch track is a good one. Branch track allows you to create one branching scenario for free on their platform. And it's actually kind of cool. And you could make a choose your own video series. The coolest one I've ever seen was on YouTube. And of course I can't find it anymore, but I saw once upon a time, it was like you had to like talk someone down from doing something violent or something like that. And the person was going to act rashly and angry. And so it was like fully a YouTube, like you clicked the screen and it took you to a separate video based on what you chose, and like had actors acting out the scene and everything. So very cool stuff. All right, so now that we started talking about the uses, the different places in pop culture that we see scenario-based learning, I want to go back into the breakout rooms and really just talk about how you might be able to use scenario-based learning in your current situation. So I know we have a lot of people who are in K through 12 and higher ed who are teaching and looking into getting into instructional design. What are some ways that you could implement scenario-based learning in your classrooms? What are some ways that you could implement scenario-based learning in your portfolios or in a portfolio project as you're trying to get into instructional design? And then if you're an instructional designer, what are some courses that you have where you could implement some assessments or questions that are scenario-based? You don't have to do like you don't have to create a whole scenario-based learning course, right? You can really add it to things that you already have, content that you're already creating. It doesn't have to be, kind of a big project to take on. And so think about some of the ill-structured problems that you face on your team, at your organization, some of the things that you cover in your courses. And I would love for you to discuss different ideas that you have on how you might implement it in your own work. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that I can update the slide for the breakout rooms.
Yeah, so everyone, if you click on the link that I just posted, it will refresh, or you can just refresh your page after a few seconds and then it should show the new prompt. Heidi, I don't know if anyone hasn't been able to take a screenshot of that in case your organization has blocked the slides. So if you would like us to show the slides again quickly before we create the breakout rooms again, just type that into the chat.
I can also just give me 1 second.
Cool.
And I can
okay, Samantha's asked. Yeah, cool. And one more thing, if you would like to also relate scenario-based learning to the course that you are creating, the ongoing project for this course, maybe you can use the opportunity to ask your peers for some advice on how you might be able to use that. Cool. Okay, I'm going to open the rooms again. We will see you all in 15 minutes.
Okay, it looks like everyone is back. So there's a question in the chat that I wanted to answer first. At what point do you usually teach the principles underlying the scenarios? So you have two options, right? You can teach them before, or you can use the scenario-based learning exercise as a way to explore those principles, right? I've seen that done a lot of times with branching scenarios where it's just dive right in, right? Just put the person right into the scenario and have them explore and go through it multiple times, right? And to see like the different outcomes, right? And then to teach the principles after the fact and why those are the right choice, and kind of explain the why after you've given people the opportunity to kind of explore a little bit. I find that's the most fun way to do it, but of course you could always teach the principles beforehand and use the scenario as kind of reinforcement, right? Yeah, of course. So how did it go? Did you find some ways to think about how to incorporate scenario-based learning into your courses, into your EduFlow projects? How did it go? Does anybody want to share? And yeah, definitely debriefing after having, you know, a branching scenario, especially where there's so many different ways that you could go through it, because people may not, they may not have had the same experience, even if you've only, even if you've gone through it multiple times, it might be different. Edith, you raised your hand. Do you want to share?
Yeah, thanks. I was already trying to chat, to put into the chat, but there was one idea that our team discussed, and I think everyone loved it, so I felt I would like to share it. We had a group of very different people from different backgrounds. Some used SPL, others never used it. But one idea was to use SPL for the policies, especially in the organization, because we realized that sometimes the policies that we have or have to deal with can be very lengthy and boring and not so attractive. So having scenario-based approach to the policies in the organization could be a really great way, especially for those people who join the organization and are in their onboarding. Like I was saying, the staff handbook that I have in my organization is over 100 pages long, and I haven't honestly read it from core to core. But I wish some parts that are important to me and make part of my work were given in a more user-friendly, reader-friendly, and critical reflection prompting format.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. Is scenario-based learning only suitable for scenarios with a limited number of actors or reduced complexity? Can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. Hi, thanks so much.
Hi.
Sure. Yeah, sorry if that is a bit of an odd question, but so, a lot of the examples that people are using, sort of for interpersonal skills or customer service, it seems that there's usually, only so many actors involved. But and I was teaching leadership and teamwork recently, and I can see how that applies too, right? But I was thinking, applying the same SPL, for instance, to a political science scenario where it's, say, about war and peace and lots of, different actors with lots of different sort of considerations. Would that work as well, or is that just too complex?
So I think that it could be too complex, right? The thing that's for me has been difficult about like building branching scenarios, especially, is that they get out of hand really fast, right? And you like start to create them and you're like, oh wait, I didn't offer an option for this answer and this answer. And they just turn into these giant things really, really quickly. So as long as you have like good guardrails in place of what you want to, what you want to address, and you like really stick to it, I think you could do that. Or if you have time and you can make it really complex, yeah, it can absolutely be complex. The one thing that can sometimes be difficult about scenario-based learning is the fact that what you or one of your stakeholders might consider best practice may be different than what another stakeholder might consider best practice. So that's something you really have to consider as well, is if there's multiple ways to do things right in your organization, that people may disagree. And so you have to really get the right people in the room to make sure that you're considering all those different angles as well. And I love soft skills, interpersonal skills, customer service, sales skills. Everybody is linking to their LinkedIn, which is wonderful. Would it still be considered SBL is if it is at the end of a training, or is there a term like scenario-based assessment? No, I think it's still scenario-based learning, as long as it's, reinforcing what the person has learned, or even if it's just, in your quizzes and things like that. And as far as tips for writing effective scenarios, I do not claim to be a good storyteller. I do have an undergrad in English, and so I can write an okay story, but I really encourage people to get inspiration for writing effective scenarios from like listening to storytelling podcasts, or just like going back to the basics of good storytelling. Like for instance, if anyone remembers the show Reading Rainbow, LeVar Burton has a podcast where he just reads short stories. And so like things like that, where it's storytelling, there's some really good storytelling resources in the L&D realm too. Rance Green has a really good book on storytelling. And so some of those things are really great things to access as a resource. Sure thing.
Sorry, my dogs are barking, and I realized that we're just about to hit the time limit. So I'm just going to quickly thank you on behalf of all of us, Heidi, for hosting such a really great session.
Thanks for
it was
having me.
So cool. I mean, just looking at the discussions, I think everyone had a great time. Yeah, I also love seeing all the faces coming back from the breakout rooms, and the smiles. It just makes everything worth it. It's so cool. I also want to encourage you to follow Heidi on LinkedIn. She's very active on LinkedIn. She posts some really good advice. I would 100% recommend that you follow her there. And I'm also pasting a link to her website, which includes links to all of her to her podcast and stuff like that. So please have a look there, and it'll take you to some really cool resources. Again, thank you so much, Heidi. It's been such a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me, everyone.